Will the Dallas Cowboys trade for a running back ahead of the deadline? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. And if you're in the DFW area, you can also check out Landon on WFAA at 11 a.m. Central Time on Fridays. He's going to be previewing that Cowboys 49er game on Sunday Night Football, so make sure you check that out. But on today's show, we're going to be answering your mailbag questions, and we've got some really good ones. Let's start with this question from Caden. He wants to know, first of all, do you think the Cowboys will make a move at running back? And is there any running backs out there that you would sign or trade for?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, listen, I mean, we've been suggesting that the Cowboys needed to do this for a very long time, obviously, and we've been anticipating the Cowboys doing this, I mean, since August, right? So I'm not going to be surprised if they end up trading for a running back because, like I said, we think that they need to for a while. They need talent infusion here. I think one more running back would do it, right? Like, I think if you could find another solid running back to pair with Rico, I think you would feel good about the running back room suddenly. So I do think that it's a low cost investment, right? Like that's, I think the thing we've kind of constantly harped on is that it's one of the few positions that at almost any point in the season, you can flip a late round pick and probably get almost a starter level quality player at the position, right? So I think that there's probably a couple of different targets that the Cowboys would have eyes on. I know you have a list of names that we wanted to go over, but just to kind of speak to it generally, we've talked about how we think that this team's kind of in a soft rebuild. I don't think that even if that is the case, that precludes them from potentially flipping a late round pick for a small investment on a running back.
I think a little bit of it depends on how the game goes on Sunday against the 49ers. Like if they're competitive and they lose, I don't think that changes anything. If they win, maybe they are a little bit more likely to go out and get a running back. But if it's another one of these games where they're just embarrassed and they're not close, maybe the Cowboys would think twice about sending more assets and spending more money at the position if they just don't view this as a playoff team.
Maybe they become sellers instead of buyers, right? Yeah. I think that's certainly a possibility that if the game doesn't go the way the Cowboys thought, I mean, look, if they win the game, suddenly you're, back into things. And now you're like, hey, maybe we need to lean further into this, see if we can just squeeze a little bit more juice and get something going a little bit. Because I do think that if the Cowboys are going to turn this around, it's going to be on the backs of internal improvement. Right. Like the younger players getting better over the bye week. But if that doesn't happen and the trajectory doesn't look right, this team could flip the switch pretty quickly and go full into selling mode and try to get something for some of their players before the trade deadline ends.
All right. So I've got 3 running backs, all at different price points. Let's go through them. The first one is Travis Etienne for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's been a really productive running back over the last couple of years. Last year in 2023, 1,000 rushing yards, 11 touchdowns, 476 receiving yards. So basically a 1,500-yard back. This year, been banged up. He's been splitting work with Tank Bigsby. It's pretty clear that Jacksonville wants to feature Bigsby more. Travis Etienne, his 5th-year option is guaranteed. So that's part of the deal, $6.1 million. But you could get Etienne for the remainder of this year and next year for about $7.5 million or so.
Is that 7.5 per year or 7.5 total?
Total. $7.5 million for a year and a half.
So that's pretty good. That's a pretty good deal. I mean, especially considering you're getting a guy that you feel like could be a little bit better than average if he can stay healthy. And that's kind of the big thing here, right? With Etienne, it's been the thing with him. I mean, since I think high school, if I remember correctly. I mean, all through college, he had issues in Clemson. There were concerns about him staying healthy. He had major injuries at certain points.
Missed his entire rookie year with a Liz Frank injury.
This is a guy that I mean, I think I remember when he came out, like his injury was just devastating because we were all super excited to see
Yeah.
what he was going to do in Jacksonville, and it just never kind of. I mean, obviously you mentioned he produced quite a bit last year. They really like Tank Bigsby, but the Jacksonville Jaguars are also in a spot where they're very much sellers at this point, right?
I
They're
think so.
clearly
Yeah.
they've lost a lot of games. They're kind of out of this situation. I think that they're going to try to course correct a little bit for next season and try to load up. So trading a guy like Travis Etienne, who's still got his 5th-year option, you probably can get something a little bit, better than an average running back that you're flipping for. It'll be interesting to see what kind of compensation Jacksonville would want for him. But I would imagine most of these guys, you're talking like flopping 5th and 6th round
Yeah.
picks or
I think
traditional.
he's the most expensive. Like in terms of cost, I bet you he's the most expensive because he's only 25 right now. He was a Pro Bowl running back last year, and he does have some juice. Like you could see this when he's healthy. Again, he's been dealing with a hamstring injury, and that's why he hasn't played a ton. But when he's healthy, he can be a really dynamic running back.
In a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of a J.K. Dobbins situation, right? Where the talent and explosive is not the issue with this guy, right? It's is he reliable enough, healthy enough
Yeah.
to kind of keep on your roster to continue to pay? So I do think that it's worth it. I would do this deal. Like this is when we had we had a pre-show to discuss the questions we're going to go over and everything. This is the first name that popped in my head is available running backs that I feel like the Cowboys should think about going for.
Yeah.
But again, like we mentioned, this is probably the most expensive guy that you're going to have to trade for that's available, right? So
And
that's something to consider.
I'd say of the guys that we're going to mention, he's probably the guy that has the most long-term upside
Yeah,
because you would have him under contract for his age 25, age 26 season. Maybe
younger
you
than
draft
Rico.
maybe you draft somebody late day 2, early day 3 next year, and then you kind of work that rotation out. But Travis Etienne's the name. All right, next one. If you want to go with an older running back, a really a 1-year rental, probably Raheem Mostert. The Dolphins aren't very good. They also have Devon Achane, who is their starting running back. They traded up. They traded a future 3rd-round pick for Jalen Wright in this year's draft. I got to imagine he's going to start getting more run in the second half of this of the year. Raheem Mostert's been again dealing with an injury. Last year led the NFL in rushing touchdowns with 18. You could get him for under $1 million for the remainder of this season. Next year, he would be 33. His base salary is 2.4 million.
Yeah, I mean, I have to think that Miami is going to continue to be sellers in this market. If they lose 1 or 2 more games, I mean, even
They're
with
2-5 right now, or 2-4 right now.
Yeah, they're 2-4, and I mean that's still is good enough for second place in the AFC East. So I mean, I do think that if they lose a game or two, honestly, I'm kind of shocked that they're rushing Tua back. And I think that if they lose a game or two, they could become pretty serious sellers. Raheem Mostert obviously is a guy that it makes the most sense to sell because I mean, just the situation you just described, the end is very full of running backs. Raheem Mostert's a known quantity that you can get something for. If you're looking to kind of reload because your season got derailed by a quarterback injury, this seems like pretty low-hanging fruit to kind of get rid of for some easy compensation.
I wonder how he would fit in a. I mean, Dallas runs some wide zone, but I mean,
They run a lot.
I wonder
Inside zone, wide zone. I think Mostert can handle that.
I think he
the
can.
Shanahan's did a lot of inside zone as well. I mean, obviously, he's a wide zone runner. What we don't know is about the power and the gap stuff. But I mean, he's a running back. I'm sure he could run it just fine.
I just won't be surprised if he ends up back with Kyle Shanahan if Christian McCaffrey can't stay healthy.
No.
And the last name again, if the key here is to find teams that you feel like are tanking or just bad that would want to sell off valuable pieces for assets. Tony Pollard's looked pretty great for the Titans this year. Now, he's the most expensive in terms of contract. You could get him back. It would be about 2 years, 13 million, I think, if you wanted to do that. Would you give up like a 5th-round pick for Pollard and just assume the rest of that contract?
I mean, maybe if you win this game against San Francisco, you will. I don't know. That's a lot of money. He just came out today and talked about how much of a better place he
we'll
is
get to
that. So I do think that there's something to that. I don't know. I to me, it makes a lot of sense. There's a fit thing here, but I think on a human level, and on a financial level, to be honest, I would rather go with some of these other options, I think.
So just to be clear, it would be about 2.5 years at 12 million because they've already paid a lot of it. It's not terrible in terms of contract, but again, you're talking about a running back that'll be 28 next year, 29 the year after that. He's looked really good this year. I doubt that the Titans are going to want to eat that much money and only get back a 5th round pick.
Yeah, and again, like he's an active part of their game plan still.
Yeah, he's getting a lot of
So
touches.
yeah, so it's not like they're like looking to move off of him or anything like that. So it makes some sense in a lot of ways, but in certain ways that it matters, it probably doesn't make
So
sense.
I think you're most interested in Travis Etienne of those 3 names, correct?
Yeah, just because I think, it makes sense. For me, it's like any kind of trade that they're going to do at this point, it should be at least a little bit forward thinking, right? Like, maybe I feel differently if this team beats San Francisco. It looks like a different team coming out of the bye with like they did last year. Maybe I feel different about how this breaks down, but I think as of right now, Etienne fits the best big mix of cost and future looking sort of prospects.
All right, Landon, you referenced it. Let's talk about the culture with the Dallas Cowboys. Does it need change? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier than ever before. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. One of my favorite things on the app is the panoramic view. You can get a look of exactly what your seats are going to look like before you buy. I've told you guys this a couple times. I like sitting in the end zone when I go to football games. I just get the best view of the game, but I don't like it where the goalposts block my view at all. So I either want to be off to the side a little bit or directly in the middle. With Gametime, you're going to know exactly what your seats look like before you buy. Plus, they have the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in award winnings. PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in most states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. Plus, PrizePicks is the only real money daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy, so your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and does not return, PrizePicks keeps your lineup alive. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Sign up today, download the app, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. 1 in the morning with Tyler Rowland, 1 in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, Landon, our next question comes from Evan. He wants to know, do the Cowboys need a change in culture after the ESPN article that came out this morning?
I don't think the ESPN article has anything to do with the Cowboys' need for a change in culture.
By the way, we should mention the article. Basically, there were some ex-players who were interviewed that were talking about how they didn't like that there were tours around the stadium and people could see them working out in the gym. They said it's not the best environment for winning.
I don't even think that they said that they didn't like it. They just said that it was weird and unusual. And, again, like, I'm really tired of, like, of us reaching past the 25 legitimate reasons this team is not playing very good football to like talk about, people tours going through the portion of the weight room. Like this is just it just
It's
seems.
like I don't know that a couple people walking through the gym or the outside is why the Cowboys defensive tackles are getting blown off the ball. Like I don't know how those are really related.
And if it is, then that's the problem, right? Like the fact that you're being distracted by something so asinine as like someone seeing you while you're doing a squat that you can't perform in front of 100,000 people in person, 10 million people at home. Like, I mean, I don't know. Like this is it just feels like this is a reverse engineering of problems, right? Like there are legitimately issues in this team. Clearly, like there's a reason that this team has struggled and had issues at different times. And I think physicality is part of that. But I don't think that it's because there's a window in the training room or in the weight room. And frankly, like I think the other part of this that kind of is a little bit asinine is the way that the beat reporters are continuing to feed this narrative as if there isn't 100 other football things that we could be talking about that provide problems to this culture. Listen, the Cowboys have a different culture than a lot of these other teams, but I also think that all these teams have very different cultures. And as much as people don't want to like think that the Cowboys are unique and a snowflake in some situations, I don't think that that's the case. I think that a lot of these teams face similar kind of a scrutiny, and even if they didn't, like this isn't the difference that between a 12-win team not being able to make it in the playoffs. Like it's so small and so insignificant. I think that the issue I have with this is that there are real issues with the culture. Let's discuss how to kind of get through this. Let's not like extrapolate on some offhand comment by several ex-players about how slightly uncomfortable they felt while working out one time.
Yeah, I've got mixed feelings on this because in one hand, I think it's kind of rich to hear players complain about the culture when a lot of times this culture has allowed these guys to go on and have successful careers outside of football. I mean, my goodness, Layden, there are four defensive ends for the Cowboys that are currently on TV right now. Chris Caney, Marcellus Wiley, and Marcus Spears all have full-time media jobs. What other 3-4 defensive end is in media the way those guys are, right? Like that's just the Cowboys brand. You have a fullback that's one of the biggest play-by-play or color guys in the league, and Daryl Johnston, right? Like I have a hard time feeling bad for the players that way. Like the Cowboys brand gives them a lot of opportunities. Sometimes you just got to ignore it, right? Like maybe it's not the most conducive to winning, but I have a really hard time believing that a couple people walking through the gym is why Stephon Gilmore couldn't cover Dontavian Wicks in the playoff game. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you just need to go out there and play better.
Yeah. And that's, I think the issue is that it feels like there's so many times when, look, there are legitimate criticisms of this team. And we should be leveling those legitimate criticisms. When we criticize them for this kind of asinine stuff that doesn't have anything to do with winning and losing, it waters down the legitimate criticism that you have for Jerry Jones as the GM and as the owner. So
let me give you a real criticism that I have with like McCarthy. We've seen now multiple times Dak Prescott and Jordan Lewis come out and talk about how their practices have not been good. Now, I don't know if it's the effort, the execution, the intensity, but like Jordan Lewis and Dak have both mentioned in press conferences how they have to practice better. That's on your coaching staff. That has nothing to do with a tour going on during the week of practice. That's where you need your head coach to be a better leader.
This is an execution problem. I mean, all of this is, right? Like, I mean, I think that's what, we feel like. I mean, McCarthy comes out in his press conference and talking about the GPS numbers and how crazy they are. They're running around and doing a lot. But when you're running around and doing a lot incorrectly, it doesn't really help. It's not really good practice. It's the old saying of practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. And I think that this is the issue that we're having, is that some of these younger guys are having a hard time I think concentrating and getting their assignments done properly in practice, and then that is being reflected in the game. So that's certainly a topic that I think is worth exploring. That's something that I think is worth drilling down on and getting interviews on. I just think that we spent a lot of time trying to figure out exactly why a team that's won 36 games in the last 3 years can't seem to win more than 2 playoff games. I have a hard time kind of finding whatever it is. It doesn't, even if it's as asinine as this or not, I have a hard time pinning those results on any one thing or any, even if the one thing is as broad as the Cowboys culture, right? Like the Cowboys culture itself is such a multifaceted thing that we could talk about, to kind of like, pick one or two small things that have very little to do with the Cowboys culture and with the Cowboys success writ large. I think is just like a distraction from an actual exploration into what the real issues are for this team.
And I don't want to say that culture is overrated, because it's not.
No.
I do think there is a really important part about building a program.
Yeah.
But I think a good example of how quickly that changes is like New England, right? Like once New England lost Tom Brady, you would think that the culture in the franchise would be fine and they would be right back into the playoffs and be competitive. They got worse every year because talent matters in this league, and how your players play matter more than what you did over the last 5 or 6 years. So I agree. Maybe it's a 5% of the problem in Dallas, but it's not the sole reason why the Cowboys are struggling.
Let's get through the for 95% first, then we can get to
this, we
right?
can talk about around the edges, right?
Yeah,
I just
exactly
think a lot of that is just very, very overrated, and people want to bash Jerry Jones, which you should. I mean, the Cowboys have not been up to par, but I think people are focusing on the wrong things right now.
Exactly. Let's focus up, guys. Let's get our eyes on the right spot and then attack the problem. And I'm not suggesting Jerry Jones isn't a problem. I'm suggesting that the things that we're attacking him for are not where we should be.
There's other places to criticize Jerry Jones instead of giving around tours. But all right, let's talk about the Cowboys in the NFC East. Is the NFC East still up there for the grabs, and do the Cowboys have a chance to win the division once again? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Go make a bet on this Cowboys 49er game. At one point going into the week, the 49ers were 7-point favorites. That dropped all the way down to 4.5 on FanDuel. It's back up to 5.5, just depending on when you get that line. So there has been a lot of movement in that game. Maybe you don't think the Cowboys are going to win. Maybe you think this is the game the 49ers blow out Dallas. Go place a bet on the money line, and then you're going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed that you can use on anything from point totals, the spreads, the over-unders, from the futures bets, whatever you want to bet on. It's all available on FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are answering your Twitter questions, and this last one comes from John. He wants to know, do you think the NFC East is still up for grabs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I think you look at where this team was last year, right? And keep in mind, as much as we are upset and angry with this team won the NFC East last year. Think about where they were last year, right? Like they were in the worst spot. Yeah, please give us.
So they were 4-2. They just had beaten the Chargers, and they were going into their week 8 bye. Or sorry, they were just coming out of their bye, going into week 8, but they were 4-2.
Sure.
The Eagles at the time were 6-1. They were beating all these good teams, including the Chiefs, the Bills. I think the Dolphins were in there as well. So you were 2 games back at that point. The Cowboys right now are a game behind Philadelphia, 2 games behind Washington, and none of those 3 teams have played each other yet.
Yeah, and honestly, I think Philly, we kind of talked about both of these teams on yesterday's show a little bit, but Philly is kind of where they were, I think, at this point last year, except I think it's been laid bare a little bit more, right?
just
Like
fewer
they
wins.
haven't
Yep.
they haven't been buoyed by six wins or under this false pretense that they're one of the better teams in the NFL, right? Like they have pretty clear strengths and weaknesses. The Cowboys are aware of those. I think Cowboys fans are aware of those. Washington, to me, is the team that, like, I don't have a lot of long-term faith in yet, right? Like, I think that if they can continue to run the football the way that they have, then they might be able to continue to maintain this a little bit. But I do think that they are a team that of these three teams that are most likely to face a collapse, right? They've got no Jaden Daniels this week. He's got a rib injury, so now we're starting to see kind of, hey, the the reason that there's only one Lamar Jackson, right? Like, I think that the issue is with Jaden Daniels and the way that they run that offense is, how long are you going to be able to continue to protect your very slight quarterback from major hits when you're involving him in the run game? And Jaden Daniels is, much like, Jackson, a part of the run game, an important part of the run game. So I do think that if the Commanders are able to kind of continue to play the way the brand of football that they've been playing, they will continue to have some success. But I have my doubts on their ability to continue to play that way deep into the season, because, first of all, you got a rookie. Second of all, you've already seen what the results of their quarterback taking some hits. How is that going to have an effect on his passing? And as defensive coordinators start to kind of get their hands around the tape a little bit, I think you're going to see a lot of what we saw with some of these other kind of quarterbacks in their rookie seasons. If you force him to throw the football, if you find a way to stop the run against the Commanders, I think he's done a really great job when you've isolated the wide receivers and given him one-on-one shots. It's a lot like Jalen Hurts. But if you force him to throw in the middle of the field, if you force him to be consistent and dink and dunk down the field, it'll be interesting to see if he's able to handle that at his young age.
Yeah. Now, the Commanders do have a very easy schedule coming up, and that's what's going to make this thing hard. Now, Philadelphia's got a harder schedule, but they also have some cupcake games in there as well, including, I think, they got a game against the Giants, as do the Cowboys, but Jacksonville next week, the Rams coming up, the Panthers coming up. This division is going to be decided by which team goes 3-1, 4-0 against Philly and Washington. Like, that's just what it's going to be, right? Like, whoever can get those tiebreakers and win those big games. And as we know, division games are weird. They're really weird. Yeah. We haven't seen Mike McCarthy against Dan Quinn. What's that going to look like? What's Saquon Barkley going to look like against this Cowboys defensive line? I don't know. I just don't think the division is the Cowboys aren't further away from winning the division right now as they were at this time last year. I remember looking at the odds for Dallas winning the NFC East. I tracked them every week last year. Dallas was like plus 650 to win the NFC East at this time last year. They're way better odds than that right now on FanDuel.
Yeah, I just think there's a lot more chaos. And to quote Marcus's favorite show, chaos is a ladder. There's an opportunity for the Cowboys to right this ship while all this chaos is going around them and kind of get some solid play underneath them. And look, I mean, again, if you get some improvement, if you've taken the bye and maybe figured some things out, if your young players maybe have taken a step in the off week, maybe you can stabilize this and take advantage of it. It certainly is a possibility. I just think that you look at what happened last year and how unlikely that was. This seems way less daunting in comparison to what was actually accomplished a year ago.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the odds right now from FanDuel. Washington's plus 125, Philly's plus 120, Dallas is plus 450. At the same time last year, Dallas was plus 650 to win the division. So believe it or not, as poorly as the Cowboys are playing right now, their odds of winning the division are actually better, which shows you so much can change. When you're within 2 games of winning your division after how we're going into week 8 right now, like everything is still up in the air. Everything.
Just keep it close. Keep it close. And you just don't know how it's going to happen. We've talked about it over and over and over again. These seasons, the things that happen these seasons, you can't predict. It's crazy. The oblong ball will rear its head and crazy things will happen. So you just have to stay alive, stay above, keep your head above water. And then when the moment happens, be ready to strike and be ready to take advantage of your opportunity.
And you said this last year, right? Even when at the end of the year, when Philadelphia was 12-2 or whatever, I guess they weren't 12-2, maybe they were 10-2 or whatever. Philly lost 5 of their last 6 games, right? They lost to Tyrod Taylor, or is it Tommy DeVito at quarterback? I think they might have lost to. Like they lost to Drew Lock in Seattle. Like a lot of weird things happened.
A series of unlikely events all happened in a row in a way that you would never, even dare to say as a talking head, because you would be laughed out of the room if you had told the reality. That's the thing about the NFL. If you had a crystal ball and you could tell the future, you could go on to NFL, ESPN, or whatever you want and tell the future, and no one would believe you because it sounds so insane sometimes. So just, keep alive and stay ahead above water and see what happens.
Again, I thought the Cowboys had no chance of winning the division after they lost to Buffalo and Miami in back-to-back weeks.
That's right.
But by the time we got to week 18, the Philadelphia game didn't even matter in week 18. Like Philly didn't even have control of their own destiny. That's how fast things can change in the NFL. So I'm not predicting they're going to win the NFC East or anything like that. But to think that the division is gone after 6 games is absolutely not the case. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. Go check out Locked On NFL for your second listen. On Thursday's show, we've got a crossover show with Brian Peacock of the 49ers show, of Locked On 49ers. So make sure you check that out. Landon, you and I will be back on Friday to break down this huge Sunday night football contest between two of the most banged up teams in the NFL. Can't wait. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.